Story 1. The last bus leaves at midnight. I don't drive. I never have. So when I took a night job across town, the bus became part of my life routine. Predictable, safe. Same stop, same schedule, same drivers. That's how I know this bus wasn't supposed to exist. Because according to the transit map, Route 88 stops running at 11:30 p.m., and yet, every single night at exactly 12 a.m., it arrives anyway. The first time I saw it, I had already accepted that I was stuck. I'd stayed late at work finishing up inventory, completely lost track of time, and rushed to the stop just to see the digital board blink its final message. Last bus departed. I sighed and sat down hard on the cold bench, mentally calculating the insane cost of a rideshare at this hour. That's when the streetlights dimmed. They didn't flicker off, they just became softer. Went from the darkness down the street, I heard the low, steady hum of an engine. The bus rolled up almost silently. Its headlights were dull, almost fogged over, and the bright LED route display above the windshield was completely blank. No number, no destination, nothing. The doors opened with a soft, gentle, pneumatic hiss. Inside, the lights glowed a muted, warm yellow. It looked inviting. The driver didn't look at me, just stared straight ahead into the night. I hesitated, my hand gripping the strap of my bag. "This route doesn't run anymore," I said, more to myself than to him. The driver spoke without turning his head, his voice flat and even. "It does if you need it." Something about his tone, about the quiet warmth of the bus, made me step inside. The doors closed behind me with a solid final sound. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and old fabric, like a room that had been sealed away for a very, very long time. There were other passengers already seated, not many, maybe half a dozen scattered throughout the bus. They all sat perfectly still, staring forward. No phones out, no bags on their laps. No conversation, just silence. I paid my fare out of pure habit. The machine accepted the money, but there was no beep, no flash of a green light. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I noticed something was wrong. We weren't following the usual route, past familiar intersections, but in the wrong order. Buildings I'd never seen before appeared where empty parking lots should be. Side streets seemed to stretch on for miles, twisting into unfamiliar territory. I pulled out my phone to check my location. No signal, no service. And then I saw the time. The clock on my phone was frozen. 12:01 a.m. A woman was sitting in the seat directly across from me. She looked normal enough, just tired, pale, with her eyes fixed on the floor in front of her. I gave her a small, awkward smile. She didn't react at all. Then, without looking up, she spoke in a quiet, almost inaudible voice. "Don't get off too early." Her words startled me. "Why?" I asked, my own voice a whisper. She hesitated for a long moment. Some stops don't let you back on." Before I could ask what she meant, the bus began to slow down. A stop appeared out of the darkness where I knew there shouldn't be, one just an unmarked stretch of road, completely bordered by thick, dark trees. The doors opened. No one got off. No one was waiting to get on. After a few seconds of heavy silence, the doors closed again. As the bus pulled away, I glanced at its reflection in the window. The bus stop was gone. There was nothing there but an unbroken line of trees. My heart was pounding. Stood up and walked to the front of the bus. "Where's this bus going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The driver's eyes stayed on the dark road ahead, where it's needed. That wasn't an answer. "That's not an answer," I said, a little louder this time. He finally glanced at me, his eyes reflected in the rearview mirror. They weren't angry or threatening. They were just deeply, profoundly tired, worn out. "Everyone gets off eventually," he said, and turned his attention back to the road. A few minutes later, a man wearing a long, dark coat and an old-fashioned hat suddenly stood up. The bus was still moving at full speed. "I believe this is my stop," he said calmly, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. The bus immediately slowed. The doors opened right in the middle of the street. There was nothing outside, just a thick, swirling fog that obscured everything. The man tipped his hat politely to the other passengers and stepped off into the white emptiness. The doors closed. The bus moved on. No one said a word. I stared at the seat where the man had been sitting. It was still warm. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. The woman across from me finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "This isn't a bus," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Then what is it?" I asked, my own voice shaking. "It's a place between places." "For who?" I pressed. She looked away. "For people who missed something." She told me she'd gotten on months ago. She'd missed a train, missed a crucial phone call, missed her chance to say goodbye to someone she loved. "I just needed one more ride," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't think it would take this long." My blood ran cold. "Why haven't you gotten off?" I asked. She looked back down at the floor. "I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go." The stops grew stranger. Buildings without doors or windows. Parks without paths or benches. Entire neighborhoods where every house was identical and every single one was dark and empty. At one stop, a small child stood outside on the curb, just staring at the bus with wide, empty eyes. The doors didn't open for him. The child didn't move. The bus just drove on, and then I began to understand. You didn't choose your stop. You recognized it. It was a feeling, a pull, a sense of arrival, and if you didn't recognize your stop, you just stayed on the bus. "That's why everyone sits so quietly," I whispered to the woman. She nodded slowly. Listening to hard makes it worse. You start to see stops everywhere. Later, when the bus was nearly empty, just me, the woman, and one other person in the very back, I went to the driver again. "How long have you been driving?" I asked. He took a long, slow breath. "Longer than I remember." "Why don't you leave?" I asked. From the back of the bus, someone let out a soft, hollow laugh. The driver didn't. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the bus slowed near a street I recognized. It was my street, but it looked different, dimmer. Still, like a memory of itself. My chest tightened with a feeling I couldn't explain. "This is it," I said, mostly to myself. The woman across from me suddenly grabbed my sleeve. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Are you sure?" she asked, her eyes wide with a strange mix of fear and hope. I looked outside. My apartment building stood there, dark, silent, waiting. "I think so," I whispered. The doors hissed open. The air outside felt heavier, quieter than it should have. The driver looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. "Once you get off," he said, his voice low and serious, "don't look back." "Why?" I asked. "Because it keeps track." I stepped down onto the pavement. It felt solid, real. The doors closed behind me with a final, soft hiss. The bus, with its blank sign and dim lights, pulled away into the night. I fought every instinct in my body and did not turn around. I didn't take a full breath until my key was in the lock of my apartment door. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it. My phone buzzed to life in my hand. The time read 12:02 a.m., only 1 minute had passed. I frantically opened the transit app. No Route 88 after 11:30, no record of the ride I had just taken. It was as if it never happened, but after that night things felt thinner, like the world had less weight to it. Sometimes when I'm waiting at a bus stop late at night, I hear the faint hum of an engine in the distance. Sometimes I see a pair of blank, foggy headlights approaching. They don't stop for me anymore. But I know they're there. It took me weeks to realize the truth. The people on that bus weren't lost souls. They were undecided. Stuck in a moment between leaving and staying. Between accepting what happened and holding on to what they missed. The bus wasn't taking them somewhere new. It was giving them time. I never miss the last scheduled bus anymore. I leave work early. I rush if I have to. I plan ahead, because I know it waits at midnight. So if you ever find yourself at a bus stop late at night and a bus arrives with no number, the driver tells you it's running just because you need it, ask yourself one question before you step on. What did you miss? That's still waiting for you? Some rides don't take you home. They take you nowhere until you finally decide where you belong. Thanks for listening. Story 2. The radio only plays after midnight. I don't listen to the radio anymore. It's not because I don't like music. It's because there's a station I was never supposed to hear. And once you hear it, it remembers you. The radio came with the apartment. It was an old tabletop model made of beige plastic with a cracked dial. It was the kind of thing you'd expect to find gathering dust in a storage room, not sitting neatly on a kitchen counter. My first thought was to throw it out. But then, out of curiosity, I plugged it in, and it worked. Well, mostly, during the day it picked up nothing but static. No matter how carefully I turned the dial, the sound stayed flat and empty. At night, though, that was different. The first time I heard it, it was just after midnight. I couldn't sleep. The apartment was quiet in that heavy, late-night way where even your own breathing feels too loud. I was just staring at the ceiling, thinking about nothing, when out of nowhere the radio clicked on. By itself, a soft hiss filled the room, then a voice.
Good evening.
It said calmly, "You're listening to WNRM Night Residual Memory." My heart jumped into my throat. I hadn't touched the radio, hadn't even been in the kitchen. The voice wasn't distorted or fuzzy like a typical broadcast. It sounded close, personal, like someone was speaking from just outside the room. "Tonight's program," the voice continued, its tone smooth and even, "is dedicated to those who are still awake." I stood frozen in the hallway listening. I watched as the volume knob on the radio began to turn, slowly, all on its own, making the voice just a little bit louder. The next morning I checked the radio, half expecting to find some logical explanation. It was unplugged. There were no batteries, no hidden power source. I laughed nervously and told myself it had to be stress, lack of sleep, an old apartment making old noises. It was easy to rationalize in the bright morning light. That night, to be safe, I went to bed early, determined to be asleep long before midnight. But at exactly 12:14 a.m., the radio clicked on again. The same soft static filled the air, followed by the same calm, familiar voice. "Welcome back," it said. I sat up slowly in my bed, my blood running cold. "How do you know I'd be here?" I whispered to the empty room. There was a pause from the radio, beat of silence that felt intentional. Then the voice replied, as if answering me directly, "You always are." Every night after that, the radio played. Always at the same time. Always the same station name. The broadcasts weren't music or news, they were stories. Not fictional ones, personal ones. The voice talked about people's routines, their regrets, the little moments they replayed in their minds when they couldn't sleep, and slowly, horrifyingly, began talking about mine. One night, the voice said, "You regret not answering that call?" My stomach dropped. No one knew about that. It was a secret I'd buried so deep I barely acknowledged it myself. Another night, it said, "You still wonder what would have happened if you stayed." The radio knew things I had never said aloud. Things I barely admitted to myself in the darkest hours of the night. It was like it was pulling the thoughts right out of my head. Between the broadcasts, I started hearing other things buried in the static. Faint whispers, multiple voices, all overlapping. They'd repeat strange phrases like, "Still listening, don't fall asleep, stay tuned." I tried turning the radio off, yanking the plug from the wall. It didn't matter. The dial would spin back to its position, and the broadcast would continue, sometimes even louder than before. During the day, I became obsessed. I searched online for any record of a station called WNRM, or Night Residual Memory. There was no FCC listing, no archived station history, no fan pages, nothing. It was a ghost, until I stumbled upon an old, obscure forum thread from over 10 years ago. It was a discussion about phantom radio signals. One comment, buried deep in the page, stood out to me. It said, "If you hear it, don't respond. It only broadcasts to listeners who are awake too long." A few days later, I ran into my next-door neighbor in the hallway. On a whim, I asked her if she'd ever heard anything strange at night. Her face went pale. "You hear it too?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. She told me she'd heard the station once, years ago, shortly after she moved in. After a week of listening, she got so scared she moved to a different apartment in the same building, as far from her old one as possible. "Still hear it sometimes," she said quietly, her eyes wide with fear. "It's not from the radio anymore." According to the forum thread, the station wasn't a broadcast in the traditional sense. It was a collection, a sort of repository where leftover thoughts and powerful emotions went when people couldn't let them go. Unfinished conversations, unmade decisions, unspoken goodbyes. The radio wasn't transmitting a signal. It was receiving one from the memories lingering in the air, from the minds of the lonely and the sleepless. One night, the voice stopped telling stories about other people. It spoke only to me. "You've been listening for a while now," it said, its tone almost conversational. "I don't have a choice," I replied, my voice shaking. There was a soft chuckle from the speaker, a dry, airy sound. "You always do." The voice then explained the rules, calmly and methodically, as if reading from a manual. "The station only plays after midnight. It only finds people who are awake and alone. It only connects with those who haven't fully let go of something from their past. The longer you listen, the clearer the signal becomes. And the clearer the signal, the harder it is to stop listening." A week later, the voice announced something new. We're opening the lines for our listeners. The radio crackled with a different kind of static. A second voice came through, faint and desperate. "A man, I just want one more chance," he pleaded. "One more chance to fix it." The host's voice replied gently, almost sympathetically. "You already had it." The line went dead, replaced by the familiar hiss. Then it happened. The moment I had been dreading. The voice said my name, slowly, carefully, as if tasting the sound of it. And now it announced, for tonight's featured listener. I stood up, my hand shaking so badly I had to grip the kitchen counter to stay upright. "I don't want this," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The radio hissed, a sound that almost resembled a sigh. "That's why you're here," I snapped. I unplugged the radio and hurled it against the counter, cracking the plastic casing. I smashed it again and again, pulled the dial off, and ripped at the wires inside. It was useless. The broadcast continued. The voice, no longer coming from the broken speaker, now echoed from the walls, from the air itself. "You can't turn it off," it said, its voice surrounding me. "You can only tune out." The forum had warned about this, about what happens to those who stay tuned in for too long. Listeners who kept listening eventually stopped leaving their apartments. They stopped answering messages from friends and family. They stopped sleeping, not because they couldn't, but because the station filled the quiet and silence. Silence became unbearable. Then one night, the voice said something that chilled me to my core, but also gave me a sliver of hope. "This will be your last program." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, then a surge of fear. "Why?" I asked the empty room. "'Cause you're ready," it replied. The static faded. The voice disappeared. The room grew quiet, too quiet. I woke up the next day to bright sunlight streaming through the window. There was no radio on the counter, no static, no voice. For the first time in weeks, I felt rested, clear-headed. I thought it was finally over. Now, every night I force myself to sleep before midnight. Lights off, phone down, no noise. Because sometimes, if I stay awake too long in that deep, heavy quiet, I hear it, faint static. Not from a radio, but from inside my own thoughts. I know the station is still there, broadcasting, waiting. For anyone who listens long enough. So if you ever find yourself up late at night and hear a radio station that only plays after the world has gone to sleep, and it sounds like it knows you, turn it off. Walk away. Do whatever you have to do, because some frequencies don't travel through the air. They travel through memory, and once they find you, they never forget the sound of your silence. Thanks for listening. Story 3. The town that appears only when you're lost. I wasn't supposed to be on that road. I had missed my exit after a long drive, the kind where fatigue blurs your sense of direction, and you trust the GPS more than your own instincts. The highway narrowed into a 2-lane road, then into something even smaller, and paved, barely marked. My phone lost its signal. The GPS screen froze on a blank gray map, and that's when the fog rolled in. Not slowly, instantly. It was as if someone had just dropped a thick white curtain right in front of my headlights. I should have stopped. I should have tried to turn around. But then, I saw the sign glowing faintly through the mist. "Welcome to Greyhaven, population," and then just a dash. No number. The road dipped sharply, and suddenly I was driving downhill into a town that shouldn't have been there. Streetlights glowed with a weak, sickly yellow, their light swallowed by the fog before it could even touch the ground. The buildings were old but somehow perfectly intact wooden storefronts, a diner, a post office, a lonely motel, but there were no people, no other cars. The only sound was the low hum of my engine. I slowed to a crawl, my headlights sweeping across empty sidewalks and dark, vacant windows. Every building had windows, but every single one was dark, like a house full of secrets. It felt like I was driving through a ghost story someone forgot to finish. As I drove deeper into town, a strange sensation crept over me. It wasn't fear. Not exactly, it was a weird sense of recognition. It's like the town knew I was coming, like it had been waiting for me. I reached what looked like a center square, a small, open area with a dry, cracked fountain and a tall clock tower rising above it. The clock's hands were frozen at 9:12. I glanced at my dashboard clock. It read 11:47 p.m., but as I watched, neither of them changed. Not a single second ticked by. Time itself seemed to be holding its breath, and then I saw it. One building stood out from the rest, a diner. Its neon sign flickered weakly in the fog, the letters struggling to spell out "open." A soft light spilled from its windows, a lonely beacon in the oppressive quiet. I pulled over and parked across the street, just sitting there for a moment, listening, but there was still nothing. Just the sound of my own heart beating in my ears. Finally, I got out of the car. The air was thick, heavy, like I was trying to breathe through a damp cloth. The bell above the diner door let out a soft, tinny chime as I pushed it open. Inside, the diner looked like a perfectly preserved photograph from another time. The counters were spotless, the chrome stools gleamed, and the tables were all neatly arranged. A pot of coffee was steaming behind the counter, the aroma filling the silent room. And behind that counter stood a woman, slowly wiping a clean mug with a cloth. She looked up when I came in and smiled, a calm, knowing sort of smile. "You're late," she said. Her voice was soft, without a trace of surprise. I didn't know this town was here," I stammered, my voice sounding loud in the stillness. She just nodded, as if that explained everything. Most people don't. I slid onto one of the stools at the counter. I looked around for a menu, but there wasn't one. No prices on the wall, nothing. "What do you serve?" I asked, feeling a little foolish. The waitress poured a cup of coffee and slid it in front of me without asking. The mug was warm in my hands. "Whatever helps you stay," she said, her voice even and calm. "Stay," I repeated, confused. She met my eyes then, and her gaze was steady, unwavering. "You'll understand." It was only then that I noticed I wasn't her only customer. A man sat in a booth by the window, his shoulders hunched as he stared down into his own coffee cup. Near the door, an elderly woman sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes closed as if she were sleeping or maybe praying. They didn't speak. They didn't move. I watched them for a full minute, and I'm not sure they even breathed. "How long have they been here?" I whispered to the waitress. She hesitated for just a second, longer than they planned. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. I took a sip of the coffee. It was surprisingly good. I decided to ask the one question that mattered. "How do I get back to the highway?" The waitress didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned forward slightly and asked me a question of her own. "Why were you driving tonight?" I opened my mouth to give her a simple answer. "I was heading to see a friend. I had a business trip, but I stopped, because I realized I didn't have a good reason. I had a destination, sure. But the urgency. The restlessness that had kept me on the road long after I should have stopped for the night. I couldn't explain it." She saw the look on my face and nodded again, that same knowing look. That's usually why Greyhaven appears. She explained it to me carefully, as if she were afraid that speaking too directly might shatter the fragile peace of the place. "Greyhaven," she said, "isn't on any map. It doesn't exist in any fixed location. It appears when someone is lost, it just geographically but internally. It finds people who are running from something or avoiding something. People stuck in place, unable to move forward or go backward. We give them time," she said softly. "Time to just stop." After finishing the coffee, it was warm and grounding. Strangely comforting, I stepped back outside. The fog had thinned just a little. I started walking down the main street, peering into the storefronts. I passed a library where the shelves were full of books, but none of them had titles on their spines. A clothing store had mannequins dressed in outfits that felt familiar, but they didn't belong to any specific era. I saw a movie theater with a grand marquee, but the sign where the movie title should be was just a blank white screen. At the far end of the town, past all the other buildings, stood the motel. The motel office was unlocked, the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open. Inside, a large leather-bound ledger lay open on the check-in counter. I ran my finger down the pages. They were filled with names. Some were written in clear, confident script. Others were scratched out, almost illegible. And some were so faded they looked like they had been erased by time itself. The dates beside the names stretched back decades. But not a single entry had a checkout date. A row of keys hung on a board behind the counter. On a whim, I took the key for room 12. The room was just down the covered walkway. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It was immaculate. The bed was neatly made. A single suitcase sat at the foot of it. My suitcase. I hadn't brought it inside from the car. I hadn't even touched it, yet there it was. I opened it. Everything was packed exactly the way I remembered doing it before I left home. That night, I slept, and I dreamed. But the dreams weren't the usual random nonsense. They were memories. Crystal clear moments from my life that I had been actively avoiding thinking about. Conversations I'd left unfinished. Choices I had delayed making, paths I had considered but never taken. I woke up with the feeling of sun streaming through the curtains, warm on my face, except there was no sun in Greyhaven. I looked outside. The town was exactly the same. The fog was just as thick. The clock tower in the square still read 9:12. I went back to the diner. The same neon sign flickered. Inside, the same people sat in the same places. The man staring into his cup. The woman with her eyes closed. No one aged. No one moved. No one left. I asked the waitress how long people usually stayed. She just glanced toward the clock tower, as long as they need. She pointed with her chin toward the man in the booth. He'd been there for years, she told me. He was waiting for a phone call that would never come. A call to apologize for something he'd done. The elderly woman by the door? She was afraid to go back home to an empty house after her husband passed. They're not trapped here, the waitress said, her voice gentle. You're choosing not to decide. That's when I noticed something else, something deeply unsettling. As I looked closer at the other customers, I saw that their faces were becoming less defined. Their expressions were soft, blurred, like unfinished pencil sketches. Their features were slowly losing their sharpness. The longer you stay, the waitress explained, seeing where I was looking, the less of yourself you need to have. My blood ran cold, and eventually, I asked, my voice barely a whisper, looked at me with a profound sadness. You become part of the town. That night, for the first time, the waitress sat down in the booth across from me. You could stay, she said. It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. There's no pressure here, no deadlines, no expectations from anyone. The idea was shockingly tempting. To just stop. No more noise.
No more demands.
Just stillness. But the thought of that eternal, unchanging quiet frightened me more than anything I'd ever face on the outside. There is a way out, she said finally, as if sensing my fear. But it doesn't stay in the same place. It moves. The road out of Greyhaven, she told me, only appears to those who are truly ready to leave. It only shows itself for a moment. If you miss it, the town will remain. Patiently waiting. I finally understood. Greyhaven wasn't cruel. It wasn't malicious. It was compassionate, but in the most dangerous way possible. It was a place that made stagnation feel safe. It made giving up feel like a relief. It made the comfort of indecision feel like peace. On my third night, I felt it. A pull, not toward the warm light of the diner or the quiet comfort of the motel room. It was a pull toward the edge of town, toward the darkness where the road disappeared into the fog. I walked there, and as I stared into the mist, it began to part, just enough to reveal a road. Oh, my road. The one I was on before everything went wrong. I went to the diner one last time. The waitress was wiping the counter, just like when I first arrived. She looked up and gave me a sad little smile. Most people don't notice the road when it appears, she said. I think they don't want to, I replied. She reached under the counter and handed me a paper cup of coffee. For the drive, she said. I didn't bother asking how she knew I was leaving. I just took it, got in my car, and drove slowly toward the opening in the fog. As I drove, the mist thickened behind me, swallowing the town whole. The faint glow of the diner lights faded to nothing. The road climbed upward out of the valley, and then Nye broke through. Clear night air, painted white lines on a familiar highway. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, suddenly coming back to life with a dozen notifications. I glanced at the dashboard. The time read 11:49 p.m. Only 2 minutes had passed. I made it home that night. I got back to my life. But sometimes when I feel overwhelmed, when the pressure builds, and I hesitate for too long on a decision, I think about Greyhaven. I think about how quiet it was. It's how easy it would be to just stop trying. And that thought, the memory of that comfortable silence, scares me enough to keep moving. So if you ever find yourself driving somewhere you don't remember choosing, and a town appears in the fog where no town should be, pay close attention. Don't look at the buildings or the empty streets. Look inside yourself and pay attention to how comfortable it feels to stay. Because some places don't need to build walls to trap you. They just wait for you to give up. And once you do, I promise you'll never feel lost again. Story 4. I started writing down what the house forgot. The first thing the house forgot was the clock in the hallway. I didn't notice right away. That's the strange part. I walked past the empty hook where it used to hang at least 3 times before my brain registered that something was missing. Not broken, not fallen, gone. And the unsettling part wasn't the disappearance. It was the fact that I couldn't remember when I last saw it. Had it been there this morning? Yesterday? The space where the memory should have been was just a smooth, blank wall, exactly like the one in front of me. I had moved into the house after a difficult year. Nothing dramatic, just the slow, grinding accumulation of exhaustion. A new city, a new job, and no close friends nearby. The house was old but affordable, tucked away on a quiet street lined with tall, ancient trees. It was the kind of place that felt neutral. A blank slate, where I could just exist for a while. At first, everything was normal. I unpacked my boxes, arranged my furniture, and tried to settle into a new routine. But then I started noticing the gaps. They were small things, easy to dismiss. A light switch in the kitchen I didn't remember turning off. A favorite mug missing from the cabinet, only to reappear on the drain board the next day. A chair I always kept tucked under the table, found, pulled out, and angled slightly toward the window. Nothing alarming, just consistent. It was the kind of thing you'd blame on being tired or distracted. For the first few weeks, that's exactly what I did. I was just stressed, settling in. My brain was playing tricks on me, but the feeling of wrongness grew, a low hum of static beneath the surface of my everyday life. It was this persistent feeling of unreality that led me to buy a notebook. A simple, black hardcover one. I told myself it was to get organized, to track my to-do lists, to feel more in control, but deep down, I knew it was for the house. Every night before bed, I started a new ritual. I'd walk through each room and write down what it looked like, where things were. The book on the coffee table, the keys on the hook, the shoes by the door. I documented what I had moved that day and what I hadn't. It felt silly, almost childish. I was playing a game with myself until the notebook began filling itself in. I remember the morning so clearly. The light was pale and gray, filtering through the curtains. I opened the notebook to my neat dated entry from the night before, and there, beneath it, was a new line. The handwriting was almost identical to mine, but not quite. It was too careful, too deliberate, as if someone was trying to imitate my style. It said, kitchen chair angled toward the window again. Cold chill, sharp and sudden, crawled up my arms. I stared at the words, my own breath catching in my throat. I hadn't written that. I hadn't even been in the kitchen after I wrote my entry last night. I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that I was no longer the only one writing in this book. That night, my hand trembled as I picked up the pen. The fear was a physical thing, a tight knot in my stomach. But curiosity, a stronger, more dangerous emotion, pushed me forward. I walked to the kitchen, deliberately pushed the chair back under the table, and returned to my room. Beneath the other entry I wrote, "Move the chair back." I left the notebook open on my nightstand, the lamp casting a small pool of light on the page. I barely slept, half expecting to hear footsteps or see a shadow in the doorway. The morning came, and the house was silent. I reached for the notebook, my heart hammering against my ribs, and there it was. A new line, written in that same slightly off handwriting, directly beneath mine. It was just one word. Noted. From that day on, the disappearances escalated. It was no longer just a misplaced mug or a shifted chair. The house began forgetting bigger things. I walked into the living room one afternoon to find that the faces in my family photos had blurred into smooth, featureless ovals. I picked up my favorite novel, and the title on the spine was gone. The cover a blank, solid color. Mirrors became the worst part. They would reflect the room back at me, but always with something subtly wrong. A corner stretched too long, a shadow hanging in a space where nothing stood to cast it. The house was erasing itself, and it was erasing my memories with it. So I wrote everything down. Every detail. The color of the curtains, the pattern on the rug, the number of books on the shelf. I became the house's memory keeper. And the notebook, my silent correspondent, kept answering. Sometimes with a simple noted, other times with a more chilling acknowledged or correction made. A pattern began to emerge. It was a rule, simple and terrifying. The house didn't forget things that were written down. It only forgot what wasn't recorded. Memory without documentation faded into nothing. It was as if the house required constant written proof of its own existence, and I was its scribe. One night, emboldened by a strange sense of partnership with whatever was sharing my home, I wrote a direct question. I think the house is reading this. I set the pen down, and before I could even take a breath, new words began to form on the page, the ink appearing as if by magic. We remember what you help us remember. My chest tightened until it ached. We. The single word shattered the illusion that this was some kind of solitary game. I wasn't alone. There was a we. And that's when I finally understood. The house wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. There were no ghosts rattling chains. It was unfinished, incomplete. It was built over something that had been abandoned old memories. Forgotten routines, entire lives that had ended quietly and been left behind. The house didn't want occupants, not really. It wanted archivists. It needed witnesses to hold its fragile reality together. We weren't just sharing a space, we were co-creating it, moment by moment, line by line. The more I wrote, the safer the house felt. The strange occurrences lessened. The furniture stayed put. The mirrors reflected true. The house became solid, stable, and almost peaceful. But there was a cost, a terrible, creeping cost. I began forgetting things outside the house. The name of a colleague I spoke to every day. An important appointment I had scheduled weeks ago. The faces of old friends started to blur in my mind, just like the photos on the wall had. It was like a transaction. For every memory I gave the house, it took one of my own. The house was trading its memory with me, and I was losing. On my last night there, I knew I had to leave. The trade was no longer one I was willing to make. My own life was becoming as faded and indistinct as an unwritten memory. I sat down with the notebook one final time. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet resignation. I wrote one final entry. I am leaving tomorrow. The response was immediate, stark, and final. Then we will forget you. I packed my bags in the silent, watching house. I don't live there anymore. The habit, the ritual, it's stuck. I still write things down every single night, in a new notebook, in a new city. Because sometimes, when I don't, I wake up feeling a profound sense of dislocation, unsure of where I am or how I got here. And in those quiet, pre-dawn moments, I swear, the house is still reading. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more tales from the places we think we know. Stay curious and stay safe. Story 5. Everyone in my town knows the siren means stay inside. In my town, when the siren goes off, you go inside. No debates. No exceptions. It doesn't matter if it's the middle of the day or the dead of night, whether you're having a barbecue in your backyard or just getting home from work. You hear that sound and you run. You go inside and you lock the door. That's just the way it is. It's a sound you don't question. This siren, it isn't for storms or natural disasters. It's not a tornado warning or a fire alarm. It's no schedule, no predictable pattern. Sometimes weeks, even months, will pass in total silence. Then, just as you start to forget, it will sound 3 nights in a row. Its mournful wail, echoing through the empty streets. When it does, everyone knows what to do. There's an unspoken, universal, understanding that grips the entire town. You stop everything. The world outside ceases to exist. The rules are simple, drilled into us from the moment we could walk and talk. Go indoors immediately. Lock all doors and windows. Turn off all the lights. Draw the curtains. Do not look outside. And under no circumstances, absolutely none, do you respond to any voices you might hear? We learned these rules like we learned our ABCs. No one ever sat us down to explain why. We just knew. The fear was passed down, a silent inheritance. I was 17 when my curiosity finally overpowered my fear. The siren started its cry just after midnight. I was home alone that weekend, parents out of town. The sudden blast of sound made my heart jump into my throat. I did what I was supposed to. I ran around the house, checking every lock on every window and door. I flipped off the lights, plunging the living room into darkness. I followed every single rule, except for one. My hand trembled as I reached for the edge of the curtain in the front window. I had to know. I had to see. I peeked through the tiny gap. The street below was full, not with people, not with cars. It was filled with figures. They were standing perfectly still in the eerie glow of the distant streetlights. Dozens of them. They weren't doing anything, just standing, facing the houses. Each one facing a different home, as if they were all waiting for an invitation. They didn't move. They didn't make a sound. But I felt their attention, this heavy, suffocating pressure, like 1,000 pairs of eyes were focused on the town, on my house, on me. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Then the voices started. They were faint at first, then clearer, familiar. I heard my mother calling my name, her voice laced with worry, asking me to let her in, saying she forgot her keys. Then I heard my best friend laughing, the same way he did when he told a stupid joke. He was calling out, asking if I wanted to come hang out. They were all there, just outside my door, a chorus of people I knew and loved, pleading, begging, coaxing. "Just open the door," my mother's voice whispered, so close it sounded like it was right outside the window. It's me. My mind screamed that it wasn't real, but my heart ached to believe it. The next morning the sun came up, and the world seemed normal again, but something was wrong. Mr. Henderson, the old man who lived across the street, was gone. His front door was just open, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. There was no sign of a struggle, no police tape, nothing. Just an empty house and an open door. The entire neighborhood noticed, but no one spoke about it. We just looked at the open door, then looked away. Another empty space at the dinner table. Another quiet house on the block. That's when I understood why you don't answer the voices, because the people they imitate are never seen again. It wasn't until I was an adult, long after I'd moved away, that I'd pieced together the real truth from hushed conversations and old town records. I learned that our town wasn't being protected. It was being contained. The siren wasn't for us. It wasn't a warning for us to hide from something trying to get in. It was a warning for them. It was a signal to tell them to stop, to remind them of the boundary they were not allowed to cross. We weren't in a sanctuary. We were in a cage, and the siren was just rattling the bars to keep the zookeepers at bay. What are they? They aren't monsters, not in the way you see in movies. They aren't ghosts or demons. They're something else. Something that imitates. Something that learns. They watch from just outside the town limits, studying us, memorizing our voices, our relationships, our fears. They are mimics of the highest order. The siren is the only thing that reminds them of the rules, a sound that says, "This far and no further." They can look, they can call, but they can't come in, as long as the siren works. One night years later, I was visiting my parents back in my old hometown. The sun went down, and the familiar deep quiet settled over the streets, but something was missing. The silence was too complete. The siren didn't sound. A primal fear I hadn't felt in years gripped me. My dad just shrugged, saying it was probably broken, that the city would fix it tomorrow. But I knew better. I went around their house, locking every door, every window, just like I was taught. Then, in the suffocating silence, came the knocking. A soft, gentle tap-tapping on the front door. That's when I had the final, terrifying realization. The siren, the rules, the containment doesn't protect you forever. It only delays the inevitable. It's a temporary truce, a system that can fail. And now, it doesn't matter where I live. Big city, small town, it makes no difference. Sometimes at night, I'll hear the distant wail of an ambulance or a police car. Every single time, a cold reflex takes over. I get up, I check the locks, and I turn off all the lights, just in case. Because you never know what might be listening. You never know what might be imitating the sounds of safety, just waiting for you to let your guard down. Thanks for watching. Story 6. The street that slowly removed itself from maps. The street I grew up on no longer exists. I mean, not physically. I can still drive there. I can still stand on the cracked sidewalk right in front of the house where I learned how to ride my bike. But if you try to search for it, any map, any app, any online database, it isn't there. And the strangest part about it all is that no one seemed to notice when it disappeared, except for me. My childhood street was perfectly, almost aggressively unremarkable. It's just 8 houses squeezed between 2 dead ends. There was one flickering streetlight at the corner that never quite worked right, casting these long dancing shadows every night. Everyone knew everyone. Doors stayed unlocked most of the time. We kids would play outside until the first porch lights flickered on, our signal to head home. Nothing bad ever happened there, at least nothing you'd call dramatic. But looking back on it now, there was always something quietly wrong with it, something that felt like it didn't want to be remembered. I first noticed something was off years after I'd moved away. A friend was coming to visit my hometown, and I was trying to give them directions to my parents' place. I pulled out my phone and typed the street name into the map app. Autocorrect tried to change it. I typed it again, slowly this time. Nothing. The app just showed a blank area. I laughed it off, assuming it was a typo or a glitch. But then, I searched for my parents' address directly. The house popped up on the map, a little pin marking the exact spot. But where the street name should have been, there was just a blank space. An empty line. That little detail just wouldn't leave my mind. So, a few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back one afternoon, fully expecting to find a construction crew, maybe a new street sign with a different name. When I got there, everything looked exactly the same. The same 8 houses with their familiar gardens. The same tall oak trees lining the sidewalk. The same unsettling quiet. But the street sign at the corner, it was gone. It wasn't broken off or vandalized. The post was still there, but the sign itself had been neatly, professionally removed. I walked over and knocked on my old neighbor's door. Mr. Henderson. He'd lived there since before I was born. He opened the door with a polite smile, but when I asked him about the street name, his expression changed. He hesitated. You know, he said people don't really use it anymore? I thought that was odd. That's strange, I replied. It's always had a name. He just frowned, looking off into the distance like he was trying to grasp a thought that was slipping away. He finally looked back at me, genuinely confused, and asked, "Did it?" That's when I started to feel this chilling sense of erasure. Over the next few weeks, I made it a point to bring up the street in conversations. And every single time, people grew uncomfortable. Not scared, not suspicious, just confused. It was like I was describing a dream they'd once had but couldn't quite recall. The details were fuzzy, out of reach. I dug through old family photo albums, found pictures of us kids playing in the front yard, birthday parties on the lawn. Ooh. The houses were all there, perfectly clear. But none of the photos had captions with the street's name. I even tried sending a letter to my parents using the old address. It never arrived. Mail sent to the new, nameless address got there, but it was always late. It was as if the street was actively being edited out of reality, one forgotten detail at a time. Back at my parents' house, I was rummaging through some old boxes in the attic and found my childhood journal. I opened it, hoping for some answers. The pages were filled with my messy handwriting, detailing everything about life on that street, the names of my friends, the 4th of July block parties, the time I fell off my bike. But as I flipped through it, I noticed something deeply unsettling. Some pages were completely blank, not torn out. The pages were still there, bound in the spine. They were just blank. As if the words themselves, the memories they held, had just faded away into nothing. That's when I finally started to understand. The street didn't want attention. It was shy, reclusive. It seemed that every time it was mentioned, documented or recorded in any way, something was lost in exchange. First, its name on a map, then a neighbor's memory, then words on a page. The street survived by staying small. It thrived by staying completely and utterly unnoticed. There was an unwritten agreement among the people who lived there. No one ever talked about the street for long. Not because they were forbidden to, but because some gentle internal nudge discouraged it. It was like forgetting was just easier than remembering. The effort to hold on to the memory was too great, and letting it go felt natural, peaceful almost. So why do I remember? I think it's because I left. Distance created a kind of shield, protecting those memories from the street's quiet influence. But I've noticed that every time I go back, it gets harder. The details become more difficult to recall. My old friends' faces start to blur. The names of neighbors fade from the tip of my tongue. Even my own vivid memories feel thinner, more transparent, the moment I set foot on that old, cracked sidewalk. The street isn't haunted. There are no ghosts, no sinister forces at play. It's simply tiring. It's slowly and gracefully removing itself from our collective memory until it becomes nothing more than a physical leftover, a collection of 8 houses and a broken streetlight on an unnamed lane that no one ever thinks to ask about. And I know that one day, probably sooner than I'd like, even I won't remember its name. And that's exactly what it wants. I'm recording this, writing this all down, saying it out loud because I need something to remain. I need some proof that it was real. Because this is how places truly disappear. They don't need to be bulldozed or destroyed. All they have to do is stop being remembered. Thanks for listening. If this story stuck with you, consider subscribing for more. Story 7. If the lights flicker twice, you're already too late. In the building where I used to live, there was one rule everyone knew, even if we never spoke it out loud. If the lights flicker once, ignore it. It's just old wiring. If they flicker twice, you grab your coat and you leave. Don't pack, don't hesitate, just go. Because if they flicker 3 times, you don't get another chance. No one ever had to explain why. You just learned. The building itself was nothing special. Old, sure, but clean. 6 floors, a single winding stairwell, and no elevator. It was the kind of place you'd expect to have creaks and groans, but it was surprisingly quiet. The tenants were quiet too. People came and went with a strange regularity. Nobody ever seemed to stay for more than a year. At first, I brushed it off as a coincidence. Maybe it was just a transient neighborhood. But then I started to notice how everyone, and I mean everyone, reacted to the lights. A single flicker would earn a quick glance upwards, a subtle tensing of the shoulders before life went on. It was a shared, unspoken acknowledgement. My own first experience happened about 2 weeks after I moved in. I was making dinner, and the kitchen light just dipped. A brief, soft pulse of dimming brightness, then back to normal. I didn't think much of it. Later, I mentioned it to my neighbor, an older guy named Arthur who'd lived on my floor for about 6 months. He just shrugged, his face unreadable. "That's normal," he said, and turned back to locking his door. His tone, though, wasn't reassuring. It was matter of fact, like telling me the mail comes at noon. The second flicker came a month later. It was late, well after midnight. I was reading in bed when the lamp on my nightstand dimmed, held for a beat, and then dimmed again, to clear, deliberate pulses of darkness. It felt different from the first one, less like a power surge and more like a signal. I heard a sudden noise from the apartment next door, a scrape of a chair and hurried footsteps. I opened my door a crack and saw Arthur, already in his coat, keys in hand. "You're leaving?" I asked, confused. It was freezing outside. He looked at me, his eyes wide in the dim hallway light. "You should too," was all he said before he hurried towards the stairs. But I stayed, was more curious than scared. I locked my door, turned off the lights, and just listened. That's when I heard it. Footsteps in the stairwell. They weren't going up and they weren't going down, they were just still pacing. A steady, heavy tread back and forth on the landing somewhere between floors. It went on for what felt like hours. It wasn't the sound of a person waiting. It was the sound of something measuring, taking stock of its territory. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, the building was quieter than usual. One of the tenants from the floor above me was gone. Just gone. Her apartment was empty, a for rent sign already taped to the door. No moving truck, no goodbyes. It was as if she had evaporated. That's when another neighbor, a young woman I'd only nodded to before, finally broke the silence. We were both at the mailboxes. She saw me staring at the empty slot for apartment 4B. "The flickers mean it's moving," she whispered, not making eye contact. "It checks the empty spaces first. Then it checks the occupied ones." "What is it? That's the question, isn't it?"
Not.
And nobody has the same answer. Some of the older residents, the ones who had somehow lasted a year or more, spoke of it in hushed tones as a presence, a lingering shadow from the building's past. Others thought it was more of a process, like the building was a living organism, pruning itself, correcting imperfections. One man swore the building itself was alive, and the flickers were its nervous system firing. But on one thing, everyone agreed completely. It notices hesitation. It preys on doubt. The moment you stop to ask, "Should I leave?" you've already given it an invitation. I only saw the third flicker once, and thankfully it wasn't in my apartment. I was walking down the hallway toward the stairs one evening. Suddenly the overhead lights flashed once, twice, 3 times, rapidly. In the air it changed. It became thick, heavy, like the pressure dropping before a storm. It felt like space itself was holding its breath, and in that vacuum, all sound died. I froze, my hand on the railing. I could feel an intense static pressure around me. And I learned something else that day. During the third flicker, doors don't work right. They look normal. The doorknobs turn. They feel solid, but they don't lead where they should. The woman who told me about the flickers explained it later. She said her friend tried to get back into his apartment during a 3-flicker event. He opened his door, and it was just a solid brick wall behind it. He turned to run, but the door to the outside wouldn't open either. That's how people disappear. They get trapped between a place that's no longer there and an escape that won't open. The building just edits them out. After that, I understood why people left so fast. They weren't just scared. Fear is a temporary state. This was something deeper. The building teaches you a new kind of instinct. It subtly, patiently rewires your brain until the 2-flicker rule isn't a rule anymore. It's a reflex, as automatic as pulling your hand from a fire. You leave because your body screams at you to run, and you've learned to listen. My time came on a cold Tuesday night. I was watching TV when the lamp beside me pulsed. Once, my heart skipped a beat. I started counting in my head. A few seconds later, it pulsed again. Twice, I didn't think. I didn't weigh my options. Instinct took over. I was off the couch, grabbing my keys and my phone from the counter. My jacket was by the door. As my fingers closed around the doorknob, the light in the hallway just outside my door flickered a 3rd time. It happened behind me. I had made it, but only by a fraction of a second, and then I heard it. From inside the apartment I had just been in, a sound. It wasn't violent or loud or scary in a traditional sense. It was the sound of replacement. It was a soft shifting, a quiet settling, like someone stepping into a role they were made for. The sound of something testing the space, feeling the contours of the room, seeing if it fit. It was the sound of my life being occupied by something else. I ran. I didn't just walk quickly down the stairs like Arthur. I flew. I took the steps 2 at a time, my feet barely touching the ground. I burst through the front door into the cold night air and didn't stop running until the streetlights of the main road felt safe. I never went back. I left everything, my clothes, my books, my furniture. They weren't worth it. The building doesn't kill you. I know that now. Killing is messy. The building is efficient. It replaces you. It finds an empty space or a space that's about to be empty and it fills it. And if you hesitate, if you doubt the rules, if you think you have another minute, you're not running from a monster. You're just making room. So, here's my final warning. If you ever find yourself living somewhere with a strange, unspoken rule of place, where everyone reacts to the same small sign, don't try to be the brave one who figures it out. Just follow them. Run when they run. Because rules like that don't come from superstition. They're not old wives' tales. They come from survivors, the ones who don't follow them. They're the reason the rules exist in the first place. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe for more. Stay safe out there. Story 8. I was hired to listen to empty rooms. The job listing was vague, but the pay was incredible. It required no experience and only had one strange condition: comfort with extended periods of silence. At the time that sounded easy, I had no idea that silence wasn't a requirement, it was the actual work. I was hired to listen to empty rooms. The building belonged to a private research firm. I won't say the name, not because of an NDA, but because even thinking it makes my throat feel tight. It was a failed office building, all gray concrete and narrow, dark windows. No signs, no logos. But inside it was spotless, not sterile, more like maintained, as if someone was expecting it to be used, just not by very many people. The interview was only 12 minutes long. The woman didn't ask about my resume. She asked things like, "Are you easily distracted by your own thoughts? And do you feel uncomfortable when a room feels occupied, even if it's empty?" I answered honestly. She just nodded, then slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Just said, "Position, observational listener, no description, just a schedule." On my first day, I got a badge, a clipboard, and a key card that only worked for one floor. My supervisor was an older man with tired, weary eyes. He walked me through the rules. "You'll be assigned one room per shift," he said, his voice flat. "You will sit inside that room for 8 hours. No personal electronics, no sleeping. No speaking unless you're spoken to." I had to ask, "What am I listening for?" He paused for a long time. "Anything," he finally said, "that doesn't belong to you." My first room was 417. It was completely empty, except for a single chair bolted to the floor and a small desk. No windows. The walls were padded with this strange, textured material. Sound didn't echo in there. It just settled. It died as soon as it left your mouth. I sat down and started my timer. For the first 3 hours, absolutely nothing happened. The silence was so complete that I became hyper-aware of my own body, my breathing, my heartbeat, the tiny rustle of my clothes when I shifted, just to stay awake. I started writing notes on my clipboard. Then at hour 4, something changed. No, it wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, like the entire room had just adjusted itself around me, like its attention had shifted. The silence grew heavier. It wasn't louder, just more present. I wrote down hour 4. Silence feels directional. That was the first time I realized I wasn't alone. Over the next few shifts, I started to understand. The rooms didn't make sounds on their own. They responded to my awareness. If my mind wandered, the room was just a room. But when I focused, when I really, truly listened, the room reacted not with noise, but with pressure. With the unmistakable feeling of being noticed back. Every listener kept logs. He submitted them at the end of each shift. One day, when no one was around, I started reading through the old ones. Most were boring, but some were deeply unsettling. The room anticipated my thoughts. I felt like something leaned closer when I paid attention, and one entry circled in red ink. "Do not acknowledge the room directly." I tried asking my supervisor what the rooms were for. It was quiet for a moment, then just said, "Some spaces retain impressions." Impressions of what? After 2 weeks, they moved me to room 513. It felt different the moment I walked in. The air was warmer. The chair creaked when I sat, even though it looked identical to the others. I started my timer. By hour 2, I felt it. A distinct sense of expectation, like something was waiting for me to finally notice it. And then, at hour 5, I made a mistake. Without even thinking, I whispered into the silence, "Hello?" The room reacted instantly. Not with a bang, but with a sudden, suffocating compression of the silence. The pressure in my ears spiked. My clipboard slid a few inches across the desk, all on its own. I froze. A light on the intercom panel blinked once, and a note appeared on the small screen. "Do not speak." After that day, room 513 was different. It felt closer, more aware. The pressure started the second I walked in. Silence felt like it was leaning in to get a better look at me. I began to feel watched not by eyes, but by attention itself. The room knew when I noticed it noticing me. I started looking at my coworkers. They all had the same look, exhausted, hollow. One woman just got up mid-shift, walked out, and never came back. Nobody talked about it. Another listener pulled me aside once and whispered, "Don't let it know you're curious." I asked her, "What is it?" She just shook her head. "It's how it starts." I started to form a theory. These rooms weren't haunted. They weren't occupied. They were incomplete. like containers for something that never fully formed. Awareness without an identity, presence without a shape. And they were starving. They needed witnesses. They needed listeners. After a month, room 513 was learning me. The pressure would start before I even sat down. The silence felt personal, familiar. It would tighten if I thought about leaving early, I wrote in my log. The room responds to intention. The next day, when I got my clipboard back, that sentence was underlined in red ink, and it wasn't my handwriting. My supervisor called me into his office. "You're progressing faster than expected," he said. Thought that was a good thing. "No," he said, sighing. "It's not." He explained that some listeners become too noticeable. That the rooms don't just want attention, they want continuity. They want a presence that stays. It's when I finally asked why the job paid so well. He looked at me for a long time. "Because people don't last," he said. "Why not?" Eventually, he said, his voice dropping. The room listens back. Then they put me on the night shift, room 513. The building was almost completely empty, just me in the room. Around hour 3, the silence shifted again. Not toward me this time, but around me. Like a shape was beginning to form out of the absence of sound. And then, a thought appeared in my mind, fully formed. Stay. It didn't feel like someone else's voice. It felt like my own idea. Reasonable. Comfortable. I wrote it down. The pressure in the room immediately eased. The thought came back, clearer this time. "You were good at this. You make the room clearer." And I finally understood. The rooms didn't just want anyone. They wanted specific minds. The ones that noticed too much. On my final scheduled shift, I walked into room 513 knowing I wasn't coming back. I sat down. The pressure was immediate, dense, and focused entirely on me. I wrote one last sentence in the log. "This room wants me to stay." The intercom light blinked. And then right below my handwriting, new words appeared on the page. "You already did." I got up and walked out before my timer was up. No one stopped me. No alarms went off. The building just let me go. To Isley. But it didn't really let me go. Ever since I left, silence behaves differently around me. Empty rooms always feel attentive. Quiet feels directional. And sometimes when I sit alone for too long, I can feel it. Something just beyond my senses, waiting patiently for me to start listening again. I keep music on all the time now. I sleep with a fan running. I never ever sit alone in an empty, quiet space, because I learned that silence isn't empty. It's just unfinished. And once it knows you're good at listening, it never stops noticing you. Thanks for watching. Story 9. The house that only appeared when we followed the rules. The map didn't look old. That was the first thing that bothered me. It was printed on modern paper, clean and uncreased, like something you'd tear out of a travel brochure. But the ink was faded in a way that didn't make sense, as if it had been exposed to a sun that no longer existed. On the back, my name was written in a handwriting that wasn't mine. After my father died, I developed a habit of just driving. No destination, no schedule, just movement. Grief made stillness unbearable, and silence was too loud. All the familiar places felt suffocating, so I took to the back roads, the rural highways, the tiny towns that didn't even bother with welcome signs. I was looking for isolated places, for a bit of quiet that didn't feel so empty. And that's how I found the map. I'd stopped at a gas station that wasn't on my GPS. There was no brand name, no price sign, just a single pump and a small building that leaned forward, like it was tired of standing. Inside, an old man sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper that had no visible headlines. I paid for my gas with cash. Instead of change, he handed me the folded map. "You'll want this," he said. I tried to refuse, telling him I didn't think so, but he just smiled gently. "You already took it." I didn't look at it until I was back in the car. It wasn't a normal map. There were no roads, no landmarks, just a list of instructions. It was titled, "Rules for Safe Arrival," it said. "Drive only after sunset. Turn off your radio at the 3rd mile marker. Do not look into the tree line when the road narrows. And rule number 4, if you see the house before the instructions end, turn around immediately." The last line was unsettling. Arrival is not guaranteed. I should have thrown it away. I should have driven in the opposite direction and never looked back. But I didn't. I followed it. The road it led me to barely existed. Just cracked asphalt with no lines, and trees pressing in from both sides, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the car. At the 3rd mile marker, just like it said, I turned off the radio. The silence that followed was immediate and unnatural, like someone had flipped a switch and just removed sound itself. The road narrowed, the trees closing in. I kept my eyes fixed forward. I did not look into the tree line. But then I made my first mistake. I saw the house too early. It was just a glimpse, a pale shape between the trees, too close to defined. My heart hammered against my ribs as I remembered Rule 4. Turn around immediately. I slammed on the brakes, wrenching the steering wheel hard, ready to get out of there. But the road behind me was gone. It just wasn't there anymore. Just a solid wall of impenetrable forest. There was only one way to go. Forward. The house now stood at the end of the road, as if it had been waiting. 2 stories. Dark windows, like vacant eyes, and a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. It looked abandoned, but not neglected. It felt patient. The map in my hand grew warm, and new text appeared beneath the rules. It read, "You did not follow instructions. Proceed carefully." The property gate was open, though I don't remember seeing a fence before. As I stepped onto the gravel path, a heavy pressure settled over everything, like the air itself was holding its breath, watching me. The porch light flickered on by itself. I reached for the front door and found it unlocked. A cold certainty settled in my gut. I knew, without being told, that leaving was no longer an option. Inside, on a small entry table, was another piece of paper. Handwritten this time, house rules read immediately. Close the door behind you. Do not explore until the house acknowledges you. If you hear footsteps above you, remain still. Mirrors are not for reassurance. And the final rule, you may leave only when the house allows it. At the very bottom, a chilling addendum. Breaking rules does not result in punishment. It results in permanence. I turned, and the door clicked shut softly behind me. The air in the house shifted. A low, resonant creak ran through the walls. Not like an old house settling, but like a slow, deep breath. It was a sound of recognition. The house had noticed me, and somewhere upstairs I heard something exhale. Once acknowledged, I was allowed to move. I stepped into the living room. All the furniture was draped in white sheets like ghosts waiting in a silent parlor. The fireplace was cold, untouched. But on the mantel sat a single framed photograph. I moved closer. My blood ran cold. It was a picture of me, standing on the front porch. It had been taken just moments ago. I backed out of the room and hurried down the hall, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. I passed a large, ornate mirror on the wall. I didn't stop, but out of the corner of my eye I saw enough. My reflection, it lagged. It was just a fraction of a second behind my actual movement, but it wasn't a delay. It was hesitation. As if my own reflection was unsure whether it should follow me. Then I heard them. Footsteps. Directly above me. Slow, heavy, and measured. One step at a time. I froze, remembering the rule, if you hear footsteps, remain still. The steps crossed the floor above and stopped right over my head, and then I felt it. A pressure pushing down from the ceiling. It's not a physical weight, but the intense, focused weight of pure attention. As I stood there, pinned by that unseen gaze, a voice entered my mind. It didn't come from the walls. It was just understood. This house exists where rules are respected. Those who fail remain incomplete. I thought of the map, the strange gas station, the way I had been so easily guided to this place. It wasn't an accident. When the pressure lifted, I knew I was allowed to move again. I made my way to the staircase and climbed. At the top of the landing were 3 doors. 2 were closed. One was open. I peered inside. My breath caught in my throat. It was my childhood bedroom. Every detail was perfect, from the posters on the wall to the worn patch on the rug. And there in the corner was the bed where my father used to sit and talk to me when I couldn't sleep. I realized the house wasn't random. It was precise. It was using my memories as its architecture. Each room it showed me held something unresolved, something unfinished. It was taking my grief and making it useful. The voice returned. You arrived carrying weight. We are balanced by what remains unspoken. The last door at the end of the hall led to the basement. Taped to the door was another note. Basement rules. Do not descend unless invited. If the lights turn on by themselves, do not proceed. If you hear your name spoken in your own voice, answer nothing. And finally, the house does not lie, but it omits. As I finished reading, a single bare bulb at the bottom of the stairs flickered on. I remembered the rule, and I stayed right where I was. After a long moment, the light turned off. The stairs creaked, and the voice came again, softer this time. You may come now. I knew with absolute certainty that refusing the invitation meant staying here forever, trapped in this labyrinth of my own past. So I descended into the darkness. The basement was a single small room. In the center stood a wooden table, and on it lay a thick, leather-bound guest book. I opened it. Every single page was filled with names. Some were written in neat cursive, others in a frantic scrawl. Some names were crossed out. Some were underlined, others were circled so many times the paper had torn. I turned to the very last page. There in fresh wet ink was my name. The voice of the house spoke clearly now, a thought placed directly into my mind. Those who follow rules may leave, those who understand rules may stay. The table slid closer to me, and a pen appeared beside the book. Sin, the house suggested, almost gently. And in that moment, I finally understood. The house didn't trap people. It recruited them. Caretakers, enforcers of the rules. Permanent witnesses to its strange existence. I had to ask, why me? The house answered without hesitation. You listen. You obey. You carry silence well. I thought about my aimless driving, my heavy grief, and my strange willingness to follow a set of bizarre instructions from a map I shouldn't have trusted. The house saw it not as a weakness, but as a qualification. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the main floor above. The front door creaked open. Another guest. Another lost driver arriving. The whole house seemed to grow warmer, humming with a sense of anticipation. It was waiting for me to make my choice. To stay or to go. As I hesitated, a final rule materialized on the basement wall. Those who leave must forget the way back. I looked at the pen, at my name in the book, and then I dropped the pen to the floor. The house seemed to pause. Then I felt its sigh. A wave of disappointment washed through the room. It was also compliant. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my car, parked on the side of an unfamiliar road. The sun was rising. The map was gone. My phone had no record of the route, no evidence of where I'd been. It was like a dream, but something remained. The rules follow me now. Since that night, they appear where they shouldn't. Little handwritten notes in places they don't belong, instructions that make no sense until I follow them. Sometimes when I obey, things work out a little too well. I'm telling you this for a reason. If you ever find a map that feels like it was waiting for you, if you ever read instructions that seem oddly personal, be careful. Follow them perfectly. Because if you fail, you need to pay very close attention to the next set of rules. Some houses don't disappear. You just wait for someone willing to stay. Story 10. The town that asked me to remember it. I didn't choose the town. That detail matters more than you might think. I was driving north with no intention of stopping anywhere overnight. My phone had lost its signal an hour earlier, and the road had thinned into something that barely deserved the name. There was no traffic, no signs. Just trees and long stretches of quiet that pressed against my thoughts. Then the fog came. It wasn't a rolling fog, nothing dramatic. It just became present, as if the air had quietly decided to be thicker. When I saw the lights up ahead, I felt relief before I felt suspicion. That was my mistake. There was no welcome sign. No, now entering. The road simply became a street. Streetlights flickered on one by one, almost as if they were acknowledging my arrival. Buildings appeared in neat rows, all intact, all modest, and all slightly outdated. The kind of place that should have existed somewhere on a map, but didn't. My GPS was useless. The little icon just spinning in place. I pulled over near what looked like a town square. Clock tower stood in the center, its face illuminated. The hands frozen at 11:17. My car engine ticked as it cooled. The only sound in the profound quiet. The town was silent. Not empty. Silent. The moment I stepped out of my car, I felt watched, not stared at. but observed. As if my presence had caused a subtle shift in the town's attention. A man stood outside a diner across the street. He was middle-aged, wearing clean clothes, with a calm posture. He looked at me, not with surprise, but with something like recognition. "You're late," he said, his voice even. "I don't think so," I replied, a little confused. He smiled politely. "Everyone says that." Inside the diner, the lights hummed softly. A few people sat at tables, unmoving, until I walked through the door. Then, almost imperceptibly, they adjusted. Their postures straightened, their heads turned, but not toward me. They all looked toward the clock on the wall. It read 11:17, and it never changed. The waitress came over and handed me a menu I hadn't asked for. "You'll want to eat," she said. It wasn't a suggestion. It helps you settle. "Settle into what?" I asked. She hesitated, her gaze drifting for a moment. Being here, people started introducing themselves, slowly, carefully, as if they were choosing each word from a limited supply. Every name they spoke rang faintly familiar, not like I remembered them, but like I recognized them. As if I had known them once, a long time ago, and had forgotten something important about them. When I asked where I was, their answers were vague. They all varied slightly. A quiet place, a stopover, a town that stays. No one ever said its name. That night, they offered me a room above the diner. I accepted, mostly because refusing felt strangely impolite, like I'd be breaking a rule I didn't know existed. The room was clean, sparse. The bed looked as though it had been slept in, but not recently. And on the nightstand there was a notebook. My handwriting filled the first page. It read, "If you're reading this, you forgot again." I sat down and flipped through the notebook. It contained entries dated months, even years apart. It's all written by me, all describing the town. My arrival, my confusion, my slow, dawning understanding. The final entry ended abruptly, mid-sentence. "Tomorrow, I think I'm ready to," and that was it. The ink just stopped. I did not remember writing any of it, not a single word. The next morning, if you could call it morning, since the light never seemed to change, the townspeople behaved differently. They were less cautious, more expectant. The man from outside the diner, the one who first spoke to me, approached me again in the square. "You stayed," he said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "That's good." "Good for what?" I asked. He gestured around us at the silent streets, the still buildings. "We need someone who remembers better than we do." Over the next few days, I learned the truth in fragments, piecing it together from their quiet conversations and my own strange feelings. The town existed in a gap. It wasn't a place on a map. It was a pause. People arrived here when they forgot something essential about themselves. Grief that was too heavy, guilt that was left unresolved, choices they avoided making. The town held them, gave them a place to be, but memory faded here. That was the cost of staying. People would arrive, and slowly the very thing that brought them here would be worn away until nothing was left but a quiet presence. But I was different. Unlike the others, I wrote things down. I had a physical record. I noticed patterns. I remembered for longer, and the town responded to it. Shops that had been shuttered slowly reopened. Lights that had flickered now stayed on, burning brighter. And one afternoon, the clock on the tower twitched. It moved from 11:17 to 11:18. It was the first movement anyone had seen in years. A collective, silent gasp seemed to pass through the town, then came the ask. They gathered in the square. It wasn't ceremonial, it felt practical, necessary. The man whose name I now knew was Arthur stood before me. "We need you to stay," he said simply, "to remember us." And in that moment, I finally understood. The town didn't trap people. It sustained itself on being remembered. Without memory, it was just a collection of empty buildings and silent people. And I was good at remembering. I was their anchor. The notebook updated itself one night. I opened it to find a new page, the ink still seeming to dry. "If you leave, we fade," I tried to imagine it. Driving away, watching the town dissolve in my rearview mirror. The road gone. The lights extinguished. The people becoming something unfinished, an idea that never fully formed. And I realized leaving wouldn't just be abandoning them. it would be erasing them. The weight of that was immense, an entire existence, resting on my ability to recall it. I left anyway. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was because memory shouldn't be a burden placed on one person. It's meant to be shared, to be lived, not curated, like an exhibit in a silent museum. As I crossed the invisible line where the fog began, I looked back. The town dissolved behind me. Not violently, not tragically. It just faded, gently, like the act of being forgotten. It's not entirely gone. Sometimes, even now, I remember things I never lived. A name I've never heard spoken aloud. A face I've never met. It's the image of a clock. Its hands forever stuck at 11:17. And when that happens, I don't feel sad. I feel a quiet sense of gratitude. Because somewhere, for a little while, a town existed, as long as I could remember it. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to follow for more.